and is arrested and put in prison, his local area, his so-called nationality or so-called tribe will stand as one and support them. With South Asians, if you are progressive, if you have to leave your country or if you do things and you are in trouble, the community will not want to talk to you. And that's a reality, I think, which is very often forgotten. The other forgotten aspect is racism within the community, but also towards South Asian people from black communities as well. I think these are issues that need to be teased out by somebody someday. I don't know what this is. Okay, this is just... So there's a whole range. This was just a few sort of things that were happening in Kenya, or the record of history being taken. One of them, well, these are all books and records and things. We won't go into it. This is the book that is on sale here. This is poster or an invitation for the launch of the book. And this is 1937, a photo stolen from this book, breaking all copyright laws, I guess. But 1937, procession of workers fighting for 25% increase in wages. And if you look at the sort of colonial records and so on, these guys, characters who are sort of workers, are dismissed as powerless and stupid and all the rest of it. And here they represent the highest peak at that time of trade union activism. Kagia says, I turned next to the trade unions after hearing Makhan Singh address a meeting, but only Makhan Singh agreed with my ideas. He had the fire I admired and was a real revolutionary. Our union became part of Makhan's Labour Trade Union of East Africa. Later I became president. So the trade union activists and people who are politically active recognized what Makhan Singh stood for. And his contribution was recognized by an underground movement. At that time it was underground, 1987. Kenya, December 12th movement, where in one of the publications they have a list of Shujaa, the people they recognize as people who contributed something. And there are all sorts of people there, but Makhan Singh is there, and so is Piogawa Pinto in a way. There are lots of other people who were active in the movement as well. So in a way, there is recognition of his contribution. And obviously this is the second book that he wrote. This is the first one that I just showed, just to record, that he kept a record of all these things. This is 2 pages from a list of Makhan Singh's archives. It's a fantastic resource. Anybody looking at Makhan Singh must go and have a look at this. I mean, these are sort of his files and sort of things that he kept records in his own handwriting, in all sorts of forms, photos, newspaper articles, cuttings, and it's a fantastic record, which I think needs to be digitized. If somebody has a few spare pockets, I can get it done. But having said all that, this is a common trick. They say it takes people 7 seconds to absorb an idea. So normally when people are lecturing, they take a break and for water, giving you some time to think before you go to the last bit. Giving me time to think also, actually, because you run short of oxygen as time goes on. So, what was significant about Makhan Singh? And I just picked up 3 or 4 points really. The first one was the linking of economic and political struggles. I think what happened after independence with CIA and British government's instigation, the trade union movement was ring-fenced into trade struggles. Fight for your wages. Don't get involved in politics. So they got Tom Mboya and CIA and everybody involved in it and brought in a new organization. You don't hear of those trade unions formed as part of these struggles. The new trade unions never got involved in political struggles. And I think that's a lesson probably for us here also. If you keep too much of a distance between the TUC and Labour Party, you can see what happens. You get Blairs and Bushes and things like that. With fires all over the world. And so I think Makhan Singh connected those two things, which was an important thing which I think we need to go back and relearn. He linked worker and trade union struggles with political and national struggles, so part of the same thing. He brought Indian experience, and not only he, there were others as well, to Kenya. And ideological clarity and work on organization. So when they lift the poster I showed, the capitalists are there today, there is no sort of fear that if you use the word capitalism, will switch off some right-wing guys, or some people will not be happy, or the bankers will say we'll go over to Switzerland if you would use the term capitalist. This is the reality, and so the clarity, and for people and the workers to understand that clarity is important. Communications, I think this is perhaps the most important thing. It's no good few people in a corner sitting down with very clear ideas. They need to connect with the masses to get their ideas on board and go back with their own ideas and develop and so on. International solidarity. They started making links with trade union movement in Britain, in Russia, and all over the place, with African countries and so on. So without that, again, they would have been poorer. Action, commitment, and personal sacrifice. And this whole thing, I think we don't hear enough about his own personal sacrifice, but he never, I think we'll hear a bit more later, he never sort of did anything for money, for profit. He was a very simple life. Like it says somewhere that because of his stand about this, he never got bribed, so he always traveled by buses. He never could afford these big cars and so on. And he sort of worked. We worked on all this trade union thing without any payment. He did his work in the press to earn his living, and that is how he sort of survived. And that is how he kept his politics clean and clear. So that is Makhan Singh, and I think it's the sort of the best we can do. Just one last thing for those who may be interested. Some of us are trying to put together there's been lots written on it. We are trying to sort of give partly some kind of a political context to what he stood for, but partly to sort of collect and make available some material in a book form. So if you have any material, if you have any views and ideas, do contact one of the speakers, and we can try and put it together in this book we are trying to put together. That's that.
Thank you very much, Shiraz. It's a very comprehensive overview of the scale and significance, I think, of Makhan Singh's contribution and life. We're moving now to Amarjit Chandan. Amarjit, as you'll see from the notes, is the son of Gopal Singh, who was one of the leaders of the East African trade union movement. And Amarjit himself has been an activist in the Maoist movement in India and spent 2 years, as you'll see, in prison in solitary confinement during the 1970s. He came to this country in 1980 and has translated and published numerous anthologies of poetry, and recently a collection of his poems, Sonata for Four Hands, was published in 2009. Delighted to have you, Amarjit, and Amarjit is going to speak on what Makhan Singh means to him. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Before I start reading out my notes, my father, in Makhan Singh's absence for 7 years, from 1940 to 1947, was the acting General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress there.
The book is here.
I have a photograph dated the 17th January 1950 of my father, Gopal Singh. He is at the Nairobi railway station, surrounded by friends who had gathered together to give him a warm send-off. Father was leaving for the Punjab, his homeland, after many years. It's quite different from his earlier photos of the early 1930s taken at the same place. You can see the change of dress. Earlier times, menfolk, they used to wear pajamas, white pajamas and cotton jackets. Now the change, the European suit. Next to him is standing Makhan Singh, his close comrade. I'm in the crowd. I'm in the crowd too, aged 4, unaware of the happenings around. My father is holding my hand. From the window of the departing train, I vaguely remember the figure of Makhan Singh waving and saying, Sat Sri Akal, God is truth. Goodbye, God be with you. This was to be the last time we saw him. My father and Makhan Singh never met again. 4 months later, Makhan Singh was to be arrested and spent almost 12 years in solitary confinement. My father was to die in the Punjab in 1969, 12 years after leaving Nairobi for good, and Makhan Singh 4 years later in 1973 in Nairobi. My father always had fond memories of Makhan Singh. His name was repeated in our household time and again like a chant. He was more than a family member. After his release from jail, Makhan Singh and Dad kept in touch with each other through letters. I wish they had access to emails and Facebook and long distance calls like we have today that would have reduced their suffering. After so many years, I was a bit surprised to read their letters well kept in the Makhan Singh archive in Nairobi University. Makhan Singh even kept copies of his letters he wrote to others. Both Makhan Singh and my father were the products of mass movements of workers. I looked up to them as my role models without drawing from their experience. The Maoist movement I joined practiced pure individual terrorism in the name of revolution. In prison, in my deep solitude, I drew strength from Makhan Singh, amongst others. I truly admired him and still do. In the end, my father suffered dementia and could speak just 2 words in Punjabi on his deathbed, "Aa jao," meaning, "Come on in." I can imagine he must be asking of his departed loved ones standing on the doorstep. Surely, Makhan Singh was amongst them. Even in the communist movement, especially in the Punjab, it's hard to find a selfless, self-effacing, and principled man like Makhan Singh. He never hankered after power or wealth. He insisted on working in his father's printing press as a wage earner, not as a proprietor. He never had any property of his own. He was a Sikh communist in the true sense of the word. I do not see any contradiction in it. Now I'll read out a note on poems in Punjabi by Makhan Singh. You'll be surprised he was a poet as well. It's a pleasant surprise to read handwritten poems in Punjabi by Makhan Singh. His public persona reflected in and through his political life and writings has been that of a man who hardly showed his emotions. All the 50 poems written during 1922 to 1939 were meant to be recited at gurdwaras and mandirs on religious occasions or dedicated to friends on their weddings or departures from Nairobi to India. He uses the first line of the Sikh prayer as the masthead, Ek Omkar Satgur Prasad. There is but one God. By the Guru's grace, he is obtained. On the cover of volume 1, later he was to become a staunch atheist of Stalinist mold after a decade in early 1940s when he was an activist of the Communist Party of India in Lahore. 2 poems are dedicated to his wife Satwant. One of the poems is on Vitthal Bhai Patel and 2 are on M.A. Desai on their demise. The general theme is the reaffirmation of Sikh ideals of humanism, egalitarianism, and universal brotherhood versus capitalist exploitation of workers. He is equally critical of degeneration creeping into Sikh religion. Interestingly, some poems in the second volume share the refrain with those of my father, Gopal Singh Dukhia, that was the pen name, alias Chandan, whose poems are now deposited in Deshbhakt Yadgar Library, Jalandhar, Punjab. Both were also actively involved in the Kavya Phulwadi, that's the picture you can see, literally Poets' Gardens, Poets' Society. It was a norm to write on an agreed theme with a common refrain that's called Tarha Misra. Makhan Singh's poems are all well crafted, showing the grasp of metrical composition. Almost all the Punjabi didactic and lyrical poetry written during the national struggle seems to be the collective work or the creation of a single poet. You can see Makhan Singh standing at the back row. He was 20 that time, and my father with garland again sitting. He was the General Secretary of the Poets Society. One of the poems is addressed to my father on his departure to India, written on the 14th August 1933. It reads as follows in English translation. A message. Oh, the son of Mother India, take this message home. Tell Mother India that I am dying to see her freed from chains. Go and serve our land, share the suffering of others. Keep your mirror of conscience clear, let it shine, and don't forget us left behind. Oh, brother Dukhia, your suffering will bring happiness to many. I wish all the sons of Mother India were like you, who could end all her pain. Makhan Singh himself went to India in 1940 and returned Kenya after 7 years. The whole decade of the 1940s in his life was hectic and eventful. He was to be detained in 1950 for almost 12 years. It's worth finding out if he wrote any poems during his stay in the Punjab or during solitary detention in Maralal. Thank you very much. So this picture was taken before, I think in 1949. It's in Nakuru. There was a trade union meeting there. Makhan Singh you can see, and my father on the right side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please do hold on to your questions until after the final speaker. It's a particular pleasure to welcome Indrajit. Indrajit is Jabal Gill is Makhan Singh's daughter, and again you'll see from your notes that Indrajit has a doctorate in biochemistry and pharmacology and has worked for many years in that field in scientific research. She currently lives in Nottingham, and she's going to talk about Makhan